Welcome to F4 Talks. With me is Gary Grappo. He is a retired US diplomat. He was the former chair of Fair Observer. He spent an eternity in the region, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf region. He was indeed the ambassador to Oman. He was also in the office of the Peace Quartet at Jerusalem. So few people understand the Middle East as well as he does. And today we'll be making sense of the new peace deal, or rather making sense of Donald Trump's new peace deal with Iran. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Atul. It's always great to join you.
Gary, thank you. You are in Italy. You are in Torino today. I am in Vienna, in Austria, not far from Italy. We are both in the same time zone for a change. And without further ado, let me ask you, what exactly has been going on? Paint us a picture.
Well, it's actually, depending on where you sit, it's a very pretty picture. That would be, certainly today, the view of the Iranian leadership, or a pretty dismal one, if you're from the perspective of the United States or Israel or some of America's allies in the Gulf. Donald Trump started this war unnecessarily, and he has ended up, as a consequence, with a very unsatisfactory and I would say abysmal memorandum of understanding that brings at least this phase of the US-Iran war to an end. The current MOU, as was signed by Mr. Trump, allows for 60 days of continued negotiations between the United States and Iran. And it's important to say at the outset here that Israel, which was a partner and ally of the United States from day one of the war, is not participating at all in these negotiations. And we don't know to what extent they're being briefed. My suspicion is that they're being fairly regularly briefed, and they may even have some input, but they're not participating. Nevertheless, the MOU has been signed, and it calls for all best efforts on the part of the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz. It's been opened and closed. It goes in fits and starts. At the present moment, I think it may be opened. Some shippers are a bit hesitant yet. They're going to wait to see till traffic patterns establish themselves. They're just a little bit uncertain. Nevertheless, the Iranians have begun exporting oil. The United States has dropped sanctions for the time being on Iranian oil exports, and they're beginning to flow. And their ships, including some very large super tankers, are leaving the Gulf, headed out to their importers. This represents a windfall of sorts for the Iranians, given the amount of money they're going to be able to make from these oil sales. And it's important to note that for the first time, the United States has dropped sanctions on Iran in order for it to sell its oil in US dollars. It hasn't been able to do that for decades. So this is a real boon for the Iranians and the Iranian economy. It won't be anywhere sufficient to repair the state of the economy. And the two sides supposedly now are going to engage in discussions addressing the Iranian nuclear program, which is a fairly standard pattern of the Iranians to try and push those negotiations out as far as possible into the future.
So two quick things, Gary. The Iranians have come out and said that J.D. Vance might have claimed that there will be nuclear inspectors coming in to inspect the weapons program. But they've said, look, we haven't really talked about nuclear stuff. We haven't given any commitments on nuclear stuff. And the second thing, and perhaps as alarmingly, if not more alarmingly, is the fact that the Iranians have said they will administer Hormuz, which means that they will be extracting geopolitical rent, a toll tax, the Ayatollah toll gate, as some people are calling it, and ships will be paying, shall we say, protection money, hafta, call what you will, to the Iranians for safe passage. Now, If these two things stand, then a lot of principles, whether it is a world of nuclear non-proliferation or it is the freedom of navigation of the seas, which every global superpower since Britain emerged as top dog has managed, all the way from the Strait of Gibraltar, Suez Canal after it was built, Bab el Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca. All of these have been open in passage. Now, all of these straits could be up for grabs for geopolitical rent because of a precedent. And even if they are not, other states could claim to administer these waterways and start earning money as well. Over to you on these 2 points.
No, you're absolutely correct. And it's something I hope this administration is aware of. I'm not sure they are. But before I get to that, to address your first point on apparently conflicting public statements by the Americans, principally Vice President Vance and the Iranians. It's important to state flat out that the two sides are playing to different audiences. Obviously, Mr. Vance wants to paint this as everything is going swimmingly well, and that the United States is making progress, the Iranians are complying, and just stand by. We're going to be able to check all the blocks by the end of these negotiations.
Donald Trump has achieved what Barack Obama failed. Barack Obama's JCPOA, joint.
They haven't said that yet, but of course, it's unspoken. And by the way, you can be sure that everyone is going to grade the eventual outcome of these negotiations by the standard of the JCPOA. Be that as it may,
Gary, very quickly, tell our viewers, tell our listeners about JCPOA. In a few sentences, give them some color because a lot of them do not know about this.
The JCPOA, and known by its formal name, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was signed not only by the United States and Iran, but by the EU, France, Britain, Germany, Russia, and China. In 2015, after 2+ years of negotiations. Very extensive, very detailed. All sides brought in some of their foremost nuclear scientists. The United States brought in its Secretary of Energy, who happened to be a Nobel Prize winner in physics, into these negotiations, and really negotiated extensively on not only the nuclear question, which is very detailed. By the way, that whole agreement, all 159 pages, is online, open to the public to read. And they went point by point on what was required on the part of all the parties in that agreement. Donald Trump abrogated that agreement in 2018, said it was the worst deal in the history of international agreements, which was patently false. Be that as it may, the United States withdrew. And so we are where we are today. And I would say he has now set a very high bar for himself if he wants to do something that is a deal, or close something that's a deal better than the JCPOA, given the current mindset of the Iranians. But getting back to the point about conflicting statements, for the Iranian side, they're playing to two sides inside Iran. They're playing to, first of all, the pragmatists and the general public who want to hear that Iran is getting what it needs economically. So lifting of sanctions, flow of oil, the release at some point of Iranian assets estimated at some $25 billion that are being held in overseas banks by U.S. sanctions. These are the things that the Iranians want. And in fact, the so-called pragmatists in the Iranian government want too. They understand the desperate state of the Iranian economy right now, and action needs to be taken to correct that. And this can help tremendously. Now, not all of what they're saying is true on that account. What they're not saying, or what they don't want to say to the public, because they don't want hardliners to know it, is that they may have to make some compromises. Maybe not necessarily on the nuclear account yet, but those may be coming. We'll have to see. We know they're going to have to do it. There is a line that the Americans are simply not going to cross when it comes to the nuclear account. But they want to hold off doing that, and they want to present as favorable a picture of these negotiations as is possible to the Iranian people and to the hardliners who didn't even want to begin these negotiations, would be very pleased to take the MOU, thank you very much, and go home without further talks. And so the negotiators, so-called pragmatists, are walking a very, very fine line. So that explains how the two sides may be presenting their views on what is taking place to the respective publics and to the public in general worldwide. With respect to the Strait of Hormuz, there is no question that while the Iranians have committed to best efforts to open the strait, it's only for 60 days. And what is unclear is what happens at the end of the 60 days. Are we going to revert back to a closure of the Strait of Hormuz? Are the Iranians going to establish a toll, which I think you read correctly is pretty much extortion, along the lines that the Houthis tried to do a year or two ago in the Bab el-Mandab and in the Red Sea, and that would violate pretty much every international accord out there, starting with the International Law of the Seas Treaty, because the Strait of Hormuz has always been viewed by the world as an international waterway, open to all vessels of all nations, including military vessels. And this would dramatically upset that. Now, the Iranians don't do anything. This is not the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, where you have considerable amount of infrastructure that needs to be maintained by Panama and by Egypt. This is not that case. Were that the case, they would be empowered to go ahead and charge a fee.
They would have a legal justification,
absolutely,
for their actions.
They have no legal justification in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, could they come up with one? Potentially. Maritime hazard warning, weather notifications, search and rescue operations, some minimal insurance policy to cover those, and maybe some other communication things. But those are really pretty minimal fees. And I want to make the point here, and I know this all too well from my experience in Oman, the actual principal travel thoroughfare in the Suez Canal lies almost entirely in Omani territorial waters.
Sorry, not Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz.
I'm sorry. In the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, absolutely. The Strait of Hormuz lies entirely within territorial waters of the Sultanate of Oman.
And let me stop you right there, Gary. You were ambassador there. You know Oman very well. You speak the language. You know the local customs. Gary, could Oman be tempted to go into a partner Iran and collect some free money?
Not if it is an absolute toll. The Omanis would not do that. The Omanis,
but could they disguise it as insurance, as something else, roundabout ways?
I haven't spoken with the Omanis, but they would scrutinize it very, very carefully, because one thing I can say for the Omanis is that they rigidly adhere to their international commitments. Mm-hmm. And if their commitments, international law of the seas, or other international waterway agreements, they'll abide by those to the letter, yeah, and to the spirit. Now, if they come up with something else, but the Omanis have already provided certain services. For example, search and rescue in the case of an accident, environmental cleanup. Now, they may end up charging companies for that, which is all well and good. And if this were the case, they may want to consider it. What is interesting is while the Iranians have made claims that they would partner with the Omanis on establishing some scheme for charging those who use the Strait of Hormuz, the Omanis have been very quiet. They have not, to my knowledge, said anything public, which is a wise thing to do. I think the U.S. administration would like them to say something publicly, but they have refrained from doing that. They just don't want to get sucked into the crossfire.
Yes, and they are the big winners of this conflict because Omani crude is now selling. It has the surest delivery, physical delivery. A lot of ships are going through Omani waters too. So Oman is, and the pipelines are coming from the UAE to Oman, and then UAE oil flows through Oman as well. So this crisis has in more ways than one been a godsend to Oman, and Iran, of course.
I wouldn't say it's a godsend. I mean, they have certainly benefited more, relatively speaking, than their Gulf partners. They do not depend on the Strait of Hormuz to export their oil. Or, by the way, I should mention their LNG, which is an important export of theirs. It all leaves through Omani ports, which of course face out into the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean. So they don't have to worry. Now, Omani ports and a few other targets, comparatively fewer, were targeted during the war by the Iranians, which greatly offended and angered the Omanis since they saw themselves as kind of arbitrators or middlemen in this dispute, and they got sucked in through these attacks, but certainly not nearly as much as the other Gulf countries were. But yes, they did not suffer significant infrastructure damage. They were able to command a much higher price as a result of the war for their oil and their LNG. So yeah, they did okay. That's not to say that they particularly want to see the war continue, because it does put them in a very difficult security situation.
Understood. So you mentioned other Arab countries. So let's talk about them. Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. Let's pick up three. All right. We will skip Qatar and Saudi Arabia for now.
Well, Bahrain and Kuwait, Qatar as well, but we can talk about them later, have a particularly difficult problem because they have no other outlet
exactly
to their markets. And that's a real impediment.
Exactly. And Marco Rubio is meeting them. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting counterparts in Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. And I know, and I'm sure you know from your sources, that these countries are extremely worried. They are deeply concerned.
They are profoundly concerned. I mean, these are the single biggest income earner for all of these countries. A little bit less for Bahrain. They're not a major oil exporter, but they do export some. But they certainly want and need this income. And if they don't have the Strait of Hormuz open to them, they're really in a bind. Long term, yes, we could be looking at the construction of pipelines that go even to the Mediterranean, but certainly to the Red Sea. And I would not be surprised if countries like Bahrain and Kuwait have already begun conversations with the Saudis and maybe even the Iraqis, although there's a vulnerability there, to do that. But it's a major capital investment. And of course, it takes quite a bit of time over very long distances. So they are facing a significant problem. Down the line, however, we should point out that if they don't find an alternative export route and they end up using the Strait of Hormuz as they have for decades now and end up paying more for it, ultimately their customers are going to be paying more. And as a result, oil prices are going to go up around the world, including in the United States and every other country. So yes, they're in a different situation than the other Gulf countries. Qatar is in a unique situation because their principal export is LNG, although they export a fair amount of oil too.
Yes.
And right now, a fair amount of that LNG is offline because of the damage they sustained during the war.
The Ras Laffan refinery is not operative right now.
Exactly.
And there was a blast inside Qatar's Ras Laffan complex, which killed 13 and injured dozens. So Qatar seems to be facing an acute crisis as well.
Yes, Qatar is facing a real problem, and its customers are facing an acute problem. Here I am in Italy. The Italians had signed a contract. I think it was a long-term contract for gas imports from Qatar. That's going to be problematic for them. They're searching for other suppliers, as are the other customers of Qatar. So Qatar has a challenge ahead of them, and even once they get their gas infrastructure back up, and this includes their LNG export ports, there's a whole question of do they look at doing gas pipelines? A major capital expenditure that would have to go through Saudi Arabia and most likely to the Gulf in their case. To the Red Sea.
Yeah.
To the Red Sea. So significant challenges for Qatar as well as Kuwait and Bahrain.
Gary, very quickly, if I can interrupt, the picture you're painting is that these Gulf monarchies are certainly facing a major economic problem. Kuwait has universal basic income. Qatar provides its citizens with a lot of facilities. These countries spend a lot. At the moment, they're not earning. Their cash flow is definitely negative. They are spending more on defense. They're earning very little because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. So they could very conceivably start selling Western assets, whether it is PSG, which has just won Champions League, that's highly unlikely, or it is investments in AI companies, which then could lead to a downturn within Western economies as well. So on the one hand, you get inflation. On the other hand, you can have an asset price meltdown. And of course, if they start selling assets, then they will not be parking there because they are not getting any dollars right now. They won't be parking their dollars in.
I wouldn't say they're not getting any dollars right now. Some of these countries, Saudi Arabia in particular, had kept reserves outside of the Gulf. And so they may be able to provide to their customers from the resources of those reserves. But those are very limited, and they may have already been exhausted. I don't know about Qatar and its gas, probably not as much. I mean, gas is very expensive to store because of the refrigeration and therefore the energy involved. And so without question, they are facing some problems.
Just very quickly, let me very quickly summarize. Spending is up, earning is down. If you were these countries, first thing someone had to do, if you were Bangladesh, you wanted to buy gas, you bought dollars and then you paid these countries. And it's not just oil and gas for Bahrain, it was also aluminium. So, and then the dollars that flowed into these countries often were used to buy Western assets, including American Treasury bonds. So there'll be a downward pressure on both stocks and bonds, which means that there'll be upward pressure on bond deals, American bond deals. This is a grim picture, Gary.
It's a very grim picture, and this is what I think is lost on the greater public, is how this war upset the international economic or financial dynamic in the way that dollars flow through the international economy, because the Gulf in particular was a major component, a major node in those financial flows. And that has been disrupted, and it will have an impact, and it has had an impact worldwide, and it could potentially have a greater impact if this isn't resolved to the complete satisfaction of all the parties. And I'm not sure that's a possibility here. I noticed that the UAE, for the first time, went to the United States Federal Reserve and asked for a $25 billion swap line. It's very
Yep.
unusual, unless a country is facing an economic crisis or a financial crisis,
Exactly.
that they would do something like
I'm glad you brought it up. I was about to bring that swap line up.
Yeah, for those who may
Please
not know what
carry
a
on.
swap line is, it's an emergency resource in the event that they don't have enough dollars on hand, and banks are required to pay their account holders or their debt holders in dollars, and so they can turn to this swap line held by the Federal Reserve. By the way, the Treasury Department has something similar, but this was done through the Federal Reserve, I believe. And the Federal Reserve takes the local currency and provides them with dollars. And it won't be all 25 billion. It would be a tranche here, a tranche there.
It was done by the Federal Reserve, Gary, but Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, pushed for it. The Treasury Secretary has claimed credit for it. And this has raised questions about two things. One, the independence of the Fed, which, as you know, is a burning issue these days. And two, it has raised questions whether the UAE and indeed the other Gulf Arab states, instead of becoming consumers of petrodollars and upholding the petrodollar system and subsidizing US financial interests and indeed US bases, are now demanding a subsidy instead from the US to stay on as allies or to stay on as committed allies.
It's an ironic twist of financial fate.
Yeah, so I have called it reverse Gulf Stream. All of us know the Gulf Stream.
Yes. No, I think it's an apt term.
Thank you. And I called it, because what happened was that dollars, let's say you're Bangladesh, you buy Qatari gas, Qatar gets the dollars, Qatar used the dollars to buy PSG, American bonds, invest in venture capital, AI companies, etc. And those dollars flow into the US. And this circular motion keeps the global economy ticking. But now suddenly the Gulf Stream is reversed. Dollars are going from the US to the Gulf, and this upends the entire global financial system.
Well, it hasn't happened to a significant degree yet, but certainly the warning signs are there. And that's why we come back to this MOU and what follows. Is the United States going to be able to negotiate a satisfactory deal that meets the needs of international markets? That is to say, the Strait of Hormuz is open for business without charge, and to the satisfaction of the United States, and that is Iran's nuclear program sufficiently constrained for the next however many years that they can agree. The Iranians have offered 5, the Americans want 20. And I'm not sure where it's going to fall, if it does, because of this battle taking place inside Iran between these pragmatists and hardliners. And so this is really critical. If they can't negotiate something by the end of the 60 days, and of course they can always kick the can down the road and extend this MOU, which I suspect.
You mentioned negotiating with the Iranians may take 60 months.
I'm more likely to put my money down on 60 months than 60 days.
Yeah.
I've said it before, Atul, but the Iranians have never won a war or lost a negotiation. Yeah. They are masters at negotiation, and I know from my own experience in Oman, in interacting with my Omani colleagues, and their shared experiences in negotiations with the Iranians. The Iranians are extremely difficult, stubborn negotiators. Even when you think you've got a deal, you don't. Even when you think they have signed, there's a but. Even when you think you're getting really, really close, you come in to close the deal. No, we need to delay. We need to postpone. And so
I have two comments to support your argument. I have close friends in various intelligence agencies, and one of them said that the Iranians are not just bazaris who know how to haggle; they're also strategic in their own way. They play the long game. And another friend of mine who's American put it beautifully. He said that dealing with the Iranians is the most difficult thing in the world because they combine the inferiority complex of the colonized with the superiority complex of the colonizer. So they're completely paranoid and schizophrenic in a way no other country comes close.
You can add to that the martyr culture that prevails in Iran.
The Shia martyrdom, and which,
Shia
yes,
faith.
very quickly, on that point, between 1980 and 88, when there was the Iran-Iraq war, and of course, this is after the 1979 revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini literally sent kids, 13-year-olds, to walk through minefields to clear them for the soldiers who followed them. And so there's a massive martyrdom culture, and a lot of these kids and very young men, because they were not just 13, they were 13 and above, were singing songs and going into battle with delight because they thought heaven awaited. And it all goes back to Karbala, because after all, Hussein charged Yazid with just 72 men and achieved martyrdom.
To this day, Iranian mothers and other family members regularly visit the cemeteries that are throughout Iran that hold the graves of those boys, young men who died in that war. And there were a lot, conservatively estimated at around 800,000, but quite possibly twice that figure. It was an enormous number. And it all, I can't say all stemmed from, but certainly part of that was a significant part of that was this martyr culture that you had, the willingness to sacrifice yourself in order to, in this case, as is the case today, preserve and persevere in the Islamic Revolution. And
very quickly, just to stop you, Gary, I think a lot of people forget that 1979 is almost like 1919. It is ideological. The regime that came to power wanted to export revolution. It wanted to export that model to all the way from Turkey to Saudi Arabia. It was a revolution wherein there was also an incredible amount of domestic repression, because it was a minority group that took over in the chaos of the revolution complete power. So fundamentally, the war that followed from 1980 to 1988, wherein Saddam Hussein tried to take over territory from Iran, and of course, in those days, he was supported by the US, and there's a famous photo of Donald Rumsfeld visiting Saddam Hussein. It's a miracle that Iran survived, because it was not a foregone conclusion.
No, it was not. About 2 years into the war, which was the period in which Iranians suffered some of the worst of that war and lost a considerable amount of territory, a deal was put on the table to end the war. This was put forward by the United Nations. That deal was rejected by the Iranian leadership. They saw it as potentially a sacrifice of the revolution. However, that deal was actually better than the deal they ended up accepting 6 months or 6 years afterwards, when they had gone 8 years in this war that clearly was going to be interminable. And Khomeini, in his own words, said, "We have to swallow the bitter pill." And they accepted this treaty that was put before them by the United Nations. They didn't get the deal they could have gotten 6 years before. but it's a reflection of their commitment, dedication, and loyalty to the Islamic Revolution, which I maintain was probably the first, but not the only, gross underestimate of the Iranians by the U.S. administration and specifically Donald Trump. That the ideological resolve of this leadership is pretty much unshakable. And not that it can't be, it could be. We just don't know where that breaking point might be. Nevertheless,
and very quickly, the last sermon of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the successor to Khomeini, referred to martyrdom, referred to Hussein, referred to sacrifice, and in a way, in the words of my British friends, basically made a martyr out of a dying old man. I've put this point to Joseph Olmert, who is our Israeli friend, our Israeli author, and he justifies the assassination, but I'm not convinced as to the wisdom of killing Ali Khamenei, because black beards have replaced white beards and they have more testosterone now.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, it was, it doesn't surprise me so much that this was lost on the current U.S. administration. Probably doesn't understand very much at all about Iran or Iranian history, culture. But I am surprised that the Israelis were not aware of this, or if they did, they decided to ignore it, and that they thought that this so-called campaign of decapitation would basically end the deal, and the United States and Israel would emerge victorious after a very short war, which they had predicted.
So let me tell you very quickly what I'm picking up from our Israeli sources, because I've been interviewing them both on and off the record. Their thinking was there's a lot of discontent. The economy is reeling. If the US comes in full throttle with us, we will be able to mow the lawn, decapitate the top leadership, and there might be an implosion. Some have remarked that had the US supported the Kurds and supported all the other different ethnicities properly, there might have been a shot. But I think the Israelis had a number of spectacular successes, whether it is assassinations of nuclear scientists or other major leaders, and they probably overestimated their power and overplayed their hand. I have a sneaking suspicion that is probably the case. Over to you, sir.
Oh, there's no question that the Israelis believed a little too much in this great grandiose plan that they had, particularly employing the Kurds. We need to bear in mind that Iranian Kurds are a divided group as well. There are at least three major political groups and some minor ones, and not all of them were in favor of armed resistance against Tehran. And so it's unclear to me how many forces the Israelis were going to be able to marshal and how effective they were going to be, particularly when Iran was facing no threat of ground attack by American forces. So in the event that the Kurds had tried something, they could certainly dispatch whether IRGC forces or Artesh, conventional army forces, and put down, and let's just make it clear, very, very violently, probably would have cost a number of Kurdish lives, any revolt by the Kurds in Kurdish Iran. So I think they overplayed their hand. They overpromised to the United States. I know this was a plan they presented to Donald Trump. I don't know how convinced he was in the end. Rumor has it that Donald Trump subsequently rejected this approach. I don't know whether he thought it would work. I know no one in the U.S. intelligence community believed it would work, that the Kurds would not be able to mount a sufficiently strong force to genuinely challenge Tehran and then perhaps trigger a greater sort of revolution or uprising on the part of the rest of the Iranian people. you would have had to do a lot more than just the Kurds, a lot
Yeah.
more, and certainly not the Israelis, but not even the United States right now would be capable of such a thing.
So, I mean, you've mentioned the intelligence community. And a number of people in Washington, D.C., where I normally reside, have pointed out that 15% of the CIA is gone. Doge fired 15% of the CIA, more than 15% apparently of the State Department. That's your old department. You know it much better than I do. 25% of the wonderful sprawling building that you have on Foggy Bottom is apparently empty. And the Bureau of Research, which had some of the best experts on Iran, are all twiddling their thumbs at home. So the question arises, was there even a basic understanding and even some kind of rudimentary preparation for this aggression, or did Donald Trump swallow Bibi Netanyahu's party line, hook, line, and sinker?
Well, it's important to note that these people from the CIA, the State Department, were particular people with knowledge and expertise specifically about countries like Iran, like North Korea, like Russia and China. Those are the people who are dismissed. That is to say, people most knowledgeable and best informed and experienced about America's top adversaries. That's the shocker here. And so there is certainly room for considerable doubt as to the quality of the analyses that was being given to the senior leadership within the State Department, maybe even within the CIA and the Defense Department. Now, what I have not heard is what has happened within the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is also a very, very large intelligence organization. You also have the National Security Agency, which collects electronic intelligence. And so certainly there was more than enough intelligence out there to conclude that this plan that the Israelis had presented, if indeed they had, was not a plan that was going to have legs for the long haul. That
but the Israelis, Gary, the Israelis genuinely believe it, and not just Bibi Netanyahu's supporters, but also people like Joseph Olmert. They thought that Iran was an existential challenge, and I don't, entirely blame them, because Iran has said death to America. They were tired of the Houthis. They were tired, in particular, of Hezbollah. And of course, they also believe that Iran has supported Hamas. So the Israelis thought of this as existential. And at the same time, the Iranians also thought that they had to take on Israel, because the last few times they haven't really gone hammer and tongs. And they saw standing up as existential, particularly after the mowing of the lawn, the decapitation of the top leadership. So we were in this curious situation wherein the Israelis did believe that the regime could fall and should fall. And the Iranian regime believed that it had no option but to fight to the bitter end. Otherwise, the whole revolution would be over and they would be a footnote in history.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I actually compare this war to the war in Vietnam that the United States fought. The Vietnamese were willing to fight forever. The Americans never were. And this is something that the Americans only belatedly learned in that very long and very costly war in which we lost 52,000 people, soldiers. So, and the Iranians are every bit as committed as the Vietnamese were. And they know that the Americans were not going to stay there forever. Now, the Israelis are going to stay forever. You're certainly correct. The Israelis saw and see Iran as an existential threat. There's a real question about The immediacy of that threat, was it imminent? No. But is it a threat existentially? Unquestionably. And that something will have to be done to address the threat of nuclear weapons in Iran. And this is where I think the administration failed. There were alternatives to doing what they did, to launching this war, which, in my view, was never going to achieve any of its goals. And of course, shockingly, failed to take into account that the Iranians would resort to closing the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the US Defense and State Departments and CIA have conducted dozens of war games involving US and Iran. And in every single one, the Iranians closed the Strait of Hormuz. How did this administration not anticipate that? Totally unprepared.
Let me stop you for a second, Gary, because it's not just this administration. Even previous administrations invested more in a blue water navy, invested more in aircraft carriers, invested more in a future full-scale war, possibly with Russia or with China, and was late to cotton on to the fact that asymmetric warfare with drones, with speedboats, with relatively inexpensive mines is a nuisance. And once you have that sort of capability, then getting a supertanker through a narrow strait is impossible. Indeed, getting a US warship becomes very risky. And the US has abandoned the Strait of Hormuz. The US Navy is not really going through it as it did in the Iraq-Iran war. And so, in a way, as I see it, the Hormuz crisis of 2026 for the US is like the Suez crisis of 1956 for the UK. It really delivers a hammer blow to US status, military, geopolitical, economic, and financial in a way nothing else has in recent years.
The U.S. sort of ability to patrol the seas around the world has probably been declining over the last 10 to 15 years. That's not to say that we were not able to meet a challenge when it appeared somewhere.
It's still the best Navy in the world.
It's still the best.
By a country mile and more.
Yeah. And it's
the U.S. Navy cannot be
advanced. We have more aircraft carriers, more aircraft deployed on carriers, and so forth. But our ability to meet multiple challenges now is what is going to be the principal challenge. We're not going to send troops or vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. We could, but we probably won't. We've never sent an aircraft carrier through the Strait of Hormuz. No Navy commander is going to do something that foolish. But we bring them fairly close to the entrance of the strait. And so, but our ability to keep the strait open now is in question because of the advent of drone technology and what that has done. And how many drones did the Iranians need to close the Strait of Hormuz? One drone launched against one tanker and the strait is closed. And the Iranians certainly know that.
Yeah. My point to you was the US Navy is by far the most powerful Navy in the world, but it can't be everything everywhere all at once. It has global responsibilities. So keeping the strait open is far too risky, far too expensive. And forget about the US Navy for a second. Even if the US Navy was escorting ships, super tankers are super expensive. And one drone is enough to push insurance costs high and also to make crews reluctant to go through the strait should there be a casualty. So it's a difficult problem, what in economics people call a wicked problem. And I think you served George Bush Sr. I think in those days, the administration recognized recognized the difficulty of the problem in the Persian Gulf and managed it. I think the estimation I've heard from older people like you who have longer memories is that the hope was to contain Iran to the point that eventually its economic mismanagement would lead it to implode just like the Soviet Union. That, I was told, was the long game. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, and it should have been the long game for the United States in Iran. What really altered the dynamic was the prevalence of mass drone technology, because you didn't need lots of ships, if any at all. You didn't need advanced fighter aircraft or bombers or torpedoes, precision weapons. All you needed was a sufficient number of drones that could threaten tanker traffic, any kind of traffic, through the Strait of Hormuz. And I would be very interested in knowing whether in all the discussions that took place in the Situation Room prior to the launch of this war, who mentioned that, or who even brought up the point. Well, the point was raised about closing the Strait of Hormuz. Trump dismissed it because he was thinking only of mines and naval vessels being used. No one thought to mention, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, I wasn't there, that they don't need vessels, they don't need mines. All they need is drones, of which, of course, we know they have tens of thousands, and they're manufacturing more as we speak in underground factories that are available to them, or they have built throughout the country. Missiles the same. And so
we must tell our viewers and listeners that Iran is a mountainous country, and therefore it lends itself very easily to safe places to make things. It is not a flat plain. It is not a desert. And the Alborz Mountains, I'm blanking, Zagros Mountains as well.
Yes.
All of them make Iran the Persian cat, because Iran is in the shape of a Persian cat, a really difficult country to invade.
Yes, well, they're not going to invade, but I mean, even to carry out some of the air operations that the U.S. and Israel did becomes complicated when you're talking about underground bunkers inside of mountains. They're made of pretty hard rock. And so this was going to be a new kind of war, and it's unfortunate, greatly unfortunate for the entire world that this was not foreseen. And the United States did not actually go after the principal point of vulnerability of this regime, which we all know to be its economy. The economy is already destitute, and it's been that way for the last 10 to 15 years. Yes,
and discontent has been rising. Protests have been increasing. Yes. The number of people out on the streets have been increasing. And in fact, what this attack has done is it has created the rally around the flag effect, because comments by
a limited rally around the flag effect. I would not say that Iranians are out there waving their flags. And that was another game that they played. The longer this war went on, the more likely that more Iranians would say, we've had enough of this. Now we're supporting, our government, as horrific as it may be, because they're defending our country. And that was another point overlooked by this administration as the war dragged on. But my point is, had we attacked the Iranian regime at its point of greatest vulnerability, the economy, and played the long game and worked with our friends and allies around the world, this could have had a different outcome. It may have taken more patience, unquestionably, but it would have had a different outcome. Moreover, if they did want to pursue this particular war, then it should have behooved them very early on, probably last fall, to reach out to our friends and allies in the Gulf and in NATO and sit down and explain the challenge. The challenge was the Iranians are going to be moving as quickly as they possibly can to develop a nuclear weapon, something that is intolerable for any of us. Intolerable.
And now Saudi Arabia has a defense pact with Pakistan.
Oh,
and
well,
Pakistan is sending troops.
Yeah.
and a
They've
Chinese
always
squadron and two drone squadrons.
Yes, yeah, and the Saudis have been looking ahead for a very, very long time, longer than most people know, on this account, and they had to be very clever so that the Americans didn't find out, and for the most part, we were able to. But now, given the current situation, you can be sure that they and the Pakistanis have been talking on what may be required for the Saudis to acquire nuclear weapons on the short term, which means basically the Pakistanis give them the weapons. Because also unknown is the fact that the Saudis extensively bankrolled the Pakistani nuclear weapons development program because it was billed as the Muslim bomb. And the Saudis had nothing to lose.
Against the Kafirs, the Hindus of India.
And the Saudis had nothing to lose, but it was an insurance policy for the long term in case someone else in the region acquired a nuclear weapon. They didn't need it because they had the protection of the United States. Things have changed now, and you can be sure if the Iranians do, in fact, end up developing a nuclear weapon, the Saudis very, very quickly will have one too, about as quickly as they possibly can.
Have nuclear. Both of them will have nuclear weapons. There's no stopping this out of the bottle.
Probably so, and it's not just the Saudis and the Iranians. There's also the UAE, Egypt, perhaps, Turkey, and now we have one of the most fragile regions in the world, just waiting to see the mushroom cloud, because they'll all be sitting there with the hair trigger. And the Israelis more so than any of them.
So to wrap up, we do not really have a peace deal. We have a memorandum of understanding that will probably take 60 months, not 60 days, to a peace deal. We have contradictory claims for domestic audiences. We have the US that stands weakened, and we have an Iran that is emboldened. Would that be a fair summary of the current situation?
Oh, absolutely. We have an MOU that aspires to be a peace deal for the Americans. For the Iranians, I'm not so sure. If it were up to them entirely, it would go no further. But they understand they're probably going to have to continue negotiations, and they will resist every step of the way. For the Americans, because I think this regime, this administration is deceiving itself about what it can achieve, because it really doesn't understand the Iranians. This has already turned into a debacle, and it could be worse. But those are probably most concerned are probably the nearby Arab states and Israel, but even the other Middle Eastern countries, as they look on this in horror and wonder what they're going to do as the Iranians seek to move as quickly as they possibly can, given the current constraints in developing their nuclear and developing a nuclear weapon, and these countries not necessarily being able to count on the Americans to come to their defense.
Gary Grappo, thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back. Lots to talk about in the coming days and weeks and months ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Always good to talk to you, Atul.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.